guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Creating with Impact podcast. I am super excited for this interview episode today, so I'm going to keep this intro as short as possible. But I just wanted to kind of jump in and say that if you guys want to support the podcast, go ahead and check out our link in bio on Instagram. You can also find ways to support us at creatingwithimpact.com/podcast. And if you scroll down, you'll see like our partners and all that fun stuff, as well as our Patreon info. So if you want to support the podcast and kind of keep it going, go ahead and check those out. And then also, if you want to get in on the discussions that we're having, or if you have a comment about a previous episode or just anything like that, you can also go ahead and email creatingwithimpactpod@gmail.com, and I will get back to you as soon as possible. And we'll also include any shout outs or things like that on the next episode as well. So thank you guys so much, and hope you enjoy this interview today. Hey, Brownie, how's it going?
Good. How you doing, Jen?
Good. Thank you so much for doing this.
My pleasure.
So basically, I guess the biggest starting point is, so you have the Disco Biscuits, you have Star Kitchen, you have the DJ sets, you have HeadCount, like the list goes on. So how do you kind of like keep everything straight and balanced and just like keep track of everything without like losing your mind?
I really don't. It's so hard. You know what happens is I go through periods where things are the focus, right? So like right now, the Disco Biscuits are my main focus. And I basically only focus on the Disco Biscuits during that time period, you know? And then if like the Disco Biscuits start to wind down for a month or two, like after the Cap Theater, we have our shows in Miami and then New Year's, but it's basically we're winding down there for about 2 months before the winter tour starts. And in that time period, I am going to be concentrating a little bit more on the DJ project. When I'm concentrating on the DJ project, I get really deep into it. It's all I think about. And I start like downloading tracks and working on making my equipment better, like, you know, upgrading software and like learning new techniques. And then sort of when that time comes to an end, like after my Meow Wolf show in Denver around the Fish Dicks thing, that was kind of the wrapping up a little period of being really deeply into the DJ project. And I kind of haven't done anything with it in a month and a half. So that's the way that my brain works, is I'm able to focus on one thing at a time. And it's really funny because when I'm out on Star Kitchen tour, it's like my whole focus is Star Kitchen. And for better or for worse, it becomes the thing that I'm most into and most excited about. And I can barely like kind of think about what's going on back at home with the Biscuits, or Aaron and John spend so much time in the studio together writing songs with Joey, our co-writer. It's just like I phase out of it. And a lot of time I get complaints. Sometimes people will be like, well, where have you been? And, you know, where I've been is concentrating on this other thing and putting my whole entire being and motivation and heart into that.
Exactly. And that makes sense too, because I feel like it'll help you be like more focused on it and just get higher quality stuff out while you're doing that, because you're not distracted by other things. With that makes it
work is to be fully focused on the thing that you're working on at that time. And if, like you said at the beginning, if you're splitting your time, focusing on all of the things at the same time, you're maybe giving less of yourself. Here's one thing. Star Kitchen came at a time where the Biscuits weren't really that focused to begin with, right? I started in 2016. The Biscuits were playing 20 shows a year. We hadn't written a new song in 6 years. We hadn't put out an album in 5 years. John was very focused on Splice and It's On Me, his tech projects that he was working on at the time. And I didn't really know if the Biscuits were like serious. And so I started Star Kitchen. I started Star Kitchen specifically for a reason, which was I wanted to become a better bass player. I wanted to be able to play at slower tempos. I wanted to learn that one period of music that I hadn't really dug into. I had dug into like the 30s and the 40s jazz, the 50s and the 60s modal jazz. And I kind of then didn't really go deep on funk music or R&B music from the late 60s all the way through the 70s. I had never really taken that deep dive before, either on the bass or really listening wise, outside of kind of just what you would hear like James Brown out in the wild or whatever it was. But I had never really gone super, super deep on that. And I had then picked back up on classic rock and jam band music, the Grateful Dead. And that was like my music from like the mid 70s through the 80s. And then, of course, we are deep on 80s music, and I've gone deep on hip hop, especially 90s hip hop. And so there was a gap in my knowledge, and Star Kitchen was meant to fill that gap. And it's kind of cool because now when I show up at like funk parties, funk nights, I know all the songs. I could hop up on stage and play with those people because I've gone ahead and learned all of those tracks and learned all of the bass lines, and I'm able to now hang there. And it made me a much better bass player to be able to learn that period of music, because the bass is such an important part, like root part of funk and R&B, and not really knowing it was a detrimental to me as a player, especially in like the parts where we go into like funk sections or funky type sections. And I wasn't really super well versed on what I was supposed to be doing in those sections.
So kind of like piggybacking off of that, for any like musicians who would be listening to this, who they want to succeed in music, but they also have these other projects going on, what advice would you give them, or like what experience have you had that kind of relates to that?
Well, just you have to be consistent in order to be successful, right? If you want to be great, you have to put in hours every single day. And you might not see the progress from Monday to Tuesday, in October, but you'll definitely see the progress if you put in a little bit of time, even just an hour a day, every single day from Monday in October till Monday in January. You'll start to see that project, little bits of progress add up over a long period of time. And they say it takes you 10,000 hours to master something. And I started, kind of counting the hours that I've put in the other day. And I don't think I've probably put in 10,000 hours of practice time yet. But, I've put in maybe like 6,000 or 7,000 hours. And we've definitely played 10,000 hours on stage. I mean, we've had at least close to that. So we've done 1,700 shows, and the shows are about 3.5 hours long. So, that comes out, that's 6,000 or 7,000 hours just on stage. And then we've done probably another, as a band, probably at least another 3,000 or 4,000 hours in practice. We used to practice 6 to 8 hours a day when we started out. And so if you add up the amount of time that I play as a group, that's kind of where, not a technical master of bass, because I haven't put 10,000 hours of technical practice in, but I've put 10,000 hours of playing in a group setting, and that's its own skill, especially improvisational. So, my ear hit a point very recently. I think I might have hit 9,000 or 10,000 hours in the last couple of months, because something happened in the last couple of months where my ear just opened up completely, and I'm able to identify if the guys in the band are playing a melody that infers changes on the bass. I'm able to identify what chord they're going to without them even playing the whole chord, just from a single note melody. And I've always had trouble with that, like hearing what's happening on stage and figuring out what chord I'm supposed to be playing. It's not easy to know if somebody is in A and they go from A to F, that's a minor 6. If you go to F there, that's a hard one to hear, especially F sharp, which is a major 6. It's even harder to hear. And if they're an A and somebody's playing a B on top of it, like I can hear a D really easily. I can hear an E really easily. I can hear the C really easily, the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th. those are the ones that were always really easy to hear. I can hear the 7, the G really easily. I know when somebody's hitting that note or that chord, but the 6 and the 9, those were always the ones that were a little bit tricky to me. And in the last, I don't know, 6 months, I just sort of got it. Like all of a sudden it clicked. And I remember back in the day when the 4 chord clicked to me, like we're playing an A and somebody puts a D chord on top of it. I remember the first time that ever sounded like normal to me, or sounded like this is something that I can easily identify every single time. And that was the first one. The 4th chord in the scale was the first chord that I was able to identify in changes. But even before that, I remember being like, oh, how am I going to ever identify these chords like in an improvisational setting? And so it's taken almost 30 years of playing to be able to hear them all. Right. And so kind of hitting that threshold of being able to master listening.
And I feel like that's kind of like the funny thing about like music too. And I'm sure like a lot of other creative processes, it's like you practice the fundamentals like over and over, and you play over and over. And then it's like one day everything just snaps into place and clicks. And you're like, okay. And then you like move on to the next thing and you're like, okay, well, let's work on this. And then you keep doing it over and over and over and over. And then one day it clicks. So it's really cool.
Are you searching for a natural way to find peace, focus, and balance in your busy life? Look no further than Monk Personal Essential Oil Diffusers. Whether you need to unwind after a long day, boost your energy, or simply find a moment of calm amidst the chaos, Monk has the perfect blend for you. Say goodbye to stress and embrace a more mindful approach to life. And as an added bonus, you can use code CreatingWithImpact for 10% off. Your journey to a happier and healthier you starts now.
So the Biscuits have a super unique sound. And I feel like that's such a huge thing, especially in music or just like any artistic endeavor. It's like finding your own voice, not just as like a individual musician, but also as a group. So was there a moment where you realized, okay, I found my voice, like this is what I sound like, this is what the group sounds like? Or was it more just like other people's perspectives kind of telling you, oh, you sound like this? Or like,
no. Well, at first we started out playing Fish and Grateful Dead songs. And there was a moment where I was like, God, everything sounds like an Antelope jam. Like I can't unhear it. Like Fish jams were constantly going on in my brain. Like my brain was just filled with that sound. I listened to Fish so much. We went to see Fish so often in the Grateful Dead that when I was just sitting at night, Fish jams would go through my head. That's what I would hear. There was a point where that was all I could hear. And then when you go to pick up your instrument and play, that's kind of what comes out, is what goes on through your brain. So the first step was stopping listening to Fish, right? That was like our first step. We did that in about 1997. It was easy because 97 Fish wasn't my favorite Fish at the time, although I love it now, but it wasn't my favorite, what was going on. So it was easy for me to withdraw from it and say, okay, this band has changed drastically in the last year and moved away from the things that I loved about them and moved into this new sound that was so pervasive through their shows that it was easy for me to say, I'm going to take a break from this. And I took a break, and in that break, we intentionally started filling our brains with electronic music. The intent was, let's change the kind of music that we're listening to so that we could get away from this sound. And if we could reprogram our brains to be singing a different kind of thing throughout the course of the day, you know, and like music gets stuck in your head, a song gets stuck in your head, a jam gets stuck in your head, and just a sound gets stuck in your head. So after a certain amount of just listening to trance music, you know, and that's what we were listening to at the time, psychedelic trance, hallucinogen, you know, all of Simon Bosford stuff was where we started, and Infected Mushroom and stuff like that. I think it was Halloween night of 1997. We had a fraternity party. It was supposed to be like the biggest party of the year because there was this other band at Penn called the Mad Hatters that used to play this Halloween show at this particular fraternity Fidel, and it would be like jam packed out the door, like, and those guys graduated and we got the gig. And I remember like we showed up and like it wasn't jam packed out the door. Like it didn't translate, like it didn't hold over to put like the Disco Biscuits at this party wasn't the big thing on Halloween that year. Mm-hmm. And so I think we were like a little bit bummed out, but our response to it was to just do like a 3-hour jam. Mm-hmm. And we played Run Like Hell. And then I remember what happened was Magner had bought a synthesizer. He bought a JP8000, the Roland JP8000. And Sammy's our first drummer. He's just started putting a 4 on the floor down and playing a trance beat. And Magner started playing a synth loop, and suddenly it was new. Like all of a sudden, like that, there was a moment where we went from this is what we sound like to nobody's ever sounded like this before, as far as we know, in terms of people holding instruments and improvising. And so that was a breakthrough moment for us because, you know, it's not quite the way that it used to be. Like back in the day, you really had to have your own sound or you were delegitimized. You know, these days, there's lots of bands that are derivative of the other jam bands that get really, really big, and like no disrespect to any of them. Like they're all like, you know, people say Goose sounds like Fish and even the Biscuits at times, and they have kind of their own sound. They do like kind of like an indie thing, but you know, their jams sound a lot like other bands' jams at sometimes. And back in the day, that'd be like disqualifying to like end up playing like Fish jams or whatever. But in this current climate, like the newer bands, it's not like as much of a thing that the fans will automatically discount you, you know. Mm-hmm. But like back in the day, you got automatically discounted if you didn't have your own sound, and you needed to have your own sound in order to break through, right? And all of the jam bands that did break through, like in our generation, were the ones that had completely their own sound. The difference with Goose is like they're just so good, right? They're mm-hmm. so good at singing. They're so good at writing songs that it transcended the fact that they are heavily influenced by other jam bands, right? Like just pure talent can transcend that. We weren't that good when we started. Like we couldn't sing, or we weren't like that virtuosic. You know, John was kind of virtuosic. Aaron was virtuosic. Sammy played all of the instruments well, but I certainly could not play bass. I was learning on the job, and that would be disqualified now. Like, you know, like the Disco Biscuits in 97, 98 would be just like disqualified from like the growth curve that we went through in 98, 99, just because now you have to be virtuosic in order to break through, right? But back then you didn't need to be virtuosic. You could be super creative. And that's what we were. We leaned on our creativity, and we leaned on the uniqueness of the sound, and the fact that we were doing something that sounded like nobody else had ever sounded was enough to break through. But yeah, it was hard. Like there were moments before that night where I was questioning whether we were going to ever be able to find our own sound. And then that night happened, and I wish it, you know, like I can't really take any credit for it. Like these two, it was Sammy and Aaron's decision in the moment to like switch over into an electronic sound that changed the trajectory of our band forever. And then we were like still heavily jam band influenced, but like, you know, over the 25 years since then, we've moved to being predominantly electronic sounding in our improvisations. And I think part of that is because, you know, that's just where we're most comfortable. That's where we lean into what we do best.
Totally. I feel like that kind of affects like the songwriting and everything too, I would think. From your perspective with songwriting, are you more focused on just trying to like convey a certain feeling, or is it just like something that pops into your head, or is there like a formula that you guys used? I know you're writing with Joey now too, so that's kind of interesting to see like how that affects it too.
Yeah, so like this last 20 songs have been all written sort of over 4 on the floor beats, which is great for us because that's our meat and potatoes of the band. It's definitely in our wheelhouse, and we're able to play really smooth and you know, as virtuosic as we get, it happens in that sort of a rhythm, right? And especially at those tempos, like, you know, like we're gotten a lot better at like slower tempos in the last couple of years, 90 BPM, especially me. Like I think part of the problem was I wasn't really great at playing slow. And so when the band played slow, it didn't sound great because one person, like a weak, you can only be as good as like all of the links in the fence, and one weak link, it's going to make the whole entire thing sound really shaky. And so back to like the Star Kitchen thing, I put so much time in those 2 or 3 years in Star Kitchen into like learning how to play over stuff at 70, 80, 90 beats per minute that we're better at that now. But like the way I think of it as like a house music DJ is house music DJs play house music, right? They start with a 4 on the floor. Maybe it gets faster over the course of the show, but generally speaking, it's between 118 beats per minute and 128 beats per minute. And generally speaking, the whole entire show has a 4 on the floor on it. And if you go to a house music festival, it's 3 days of 4 on the floor, and nobody has an issue with that. They sell hundreds of thousands of tickets at these festivals, and that's just what those people do. And so that's kind of where we're at right now, is we're kind of like a house music band, right? We play between 118 and 135 beats per minute on a 4 on the floor for most of the show at this point. I try to like mix it up. I'm trying, because I think the best shows actually will play like a fiddler, like a overture, like, Pylon and Higher, Svengali, like we'll play some stuff that gets up to 175 beats per minute and let Alan show off his drum and bass prowess, or try to play Rockefeller or The Bridge or Little Lie or stuff that's, down in the 100 beats per minute range, but just to give the crowd a break from the constant pounding on the kick drum. But also, like, I don't think you need to give the crowd a break from the constant pounding on the kick drum, because, like Armin van Buuren doesn't give you a break when you go to Swedish House Mafia or any of like the gigantic superstar like house DJs. I don't even know who a gigantic superstar house DJ is right now, but like Carl Cox or Solomon, they're playing house music the whole entire time. And it's great. They're selling out Red Rocks, and nobody's complaining that they're not playing ballads. Not to take anything away from, bands that play ballads, right? Like, I think it's great to have a wide, diverse palette of musical ability and for the show. I do think like my favorite shows are more varied than sometimes I'll look at the set like Dribble isn't really house music, but we played it at Bisco Land. We played both the first jam and the second jam over 4 on the floor. And then from there, Confrontation's not a house music song, but the jam is over a 4 on the floor. And then Orc Theme Ladies is not a house music song, but the jam has a 4 on the floor. And Spacebird has a 4 on the floor all the way through. So it had some varied, like the song parts of our second set at Bisco Land had variable tempos in it, because Dribble, Confrontation, and Ladies have non 4 on the floor parts and beats and double time and halftime and all kinds of cool stuff happening. But the jams were predominantly all over 4 on the floor in that set, and everybody seems super, super psyched about that set, right? But I'll look at those sets sometimes and be like, like I need to switch this up. We need to like put in something slow and something fast, right? Like something like Park Ave or something where it's like 90 beats per minute and it's not over 4 on the floor, and we'll get there. We're going to eventually get to the uns and kill it, but maybe it has a little bit more of an effect when you start the set out on like a Park Ave or Uber Glue, which is, 4 on the floor still sort of ish, but slower than some of the other tracks that we play. So variability is important. And I think looking back on the history of the band, if you looked at our top 10 shows of all time as widely regarded by the fan base, there's a lot of variability in those shows, like 9801, the Webster Theater, where it's like story and overture, and it's just like going all over the place tempo wise. And, I think that that's fun. So I do try to make sure that there's Shelby or a Svengali or a Pylon and High or something, Tamron Alley, something that's going to take us out of that 4 on the floor and speed the show up, or, Waves or Bassist, like just get us into a different zone. And one of the nice things about the Biscuits is we use a click track on stage a lot of the time, but when we turn it off, we tend to speed up. We start speeding up naturally. I told Alan recently, hey, when we're hitting the peak of a jam, turn the click off, because I think it's really important to let the energy of the jam dictate the tempo rather than letting the tempo dictate the energy, right? And like if you have that click on and it's stuck at 127, like there's going to be a cap on what we can do energetically. But if we turn it off and let it inch up to 130, 131, 132, the whole room is going to feel that tempo getting pulled up. And as we do, we're going to be able to peak the jam a little bit harder. And I noticed, I went to 6 Fish shows this summer, and one thing that I noticed was, I don't notice it happening during the jam, but when they got to the end of their jams and they had to like come back into the song, a lot of the time Trey would start playing the lick. And then they'd have to slow it down over like he would bring the song part back in and it'd be like way too fast. And then they'd have to like slow that down or not. Like Down with Disease, they didn't even slow it down. They just played it way, way too fast. And, you know, for better or for worse, we do that same thing. Sometimes we'll get into the end of Ladies and we'll start singing. And it's like Little Chevy Roses, how it goes. And you know, like, it's like, oh my God, this is so fast. I can barely keep up with it. But that's where the jam went, right? And sometimes you just have to turn the click off and let the jam go where it's going to go. And that's, you know, if it's speeding up because you're speeding up, it's not necessarily a bad thing. I think a lot of drummers think like, in order to be a great drummer, you have to have perfect time and not speed up, right? We're not that. We're an improvisational band, and improvisational music, you know, has ebbs and flows. Sometimes it slows down, like, you know, automatically, because that's where we're at. And Alan's become really, really great at slowing down, but not losing energy. Like if we're like a little too fast for a song, let's say we're in, you know, Spacebird or Helicopters, and we need to get into one of the new songs, which are like 10 beats per minute slower, like Shocked or Freeze or something. He's like really good at settling the tempo down 10 beats per minute, but like keeping the energy up while that happens, which we needed to learn how to do that. We used to be terrible at that. What we used to do was, as it slowed down, the jam would just tank, right? And all the energy would go away. But like now it's to the contrary, sort of, if you slow it down properly and hit a pocket, it can explode. Like the energy can explode up. So
that's like the coolest thing to me about just like live music in general, is just the effect that either crowd energy has on the band or the band's energy has on the crowd, and like how you can build that and kind of play with it a little bit. And like, especially in improvisation too, because you're just going, like, you guys, I've listened to, I forget what podcast it was on, but basically you were talking about stepping off the cliff in like an improv jam, and you just go for it. And I feel like, I guess kind of
every single jam we have to jump off the cliff, right? We never know where we're going.
Exactly. So when you're in like a band with a group of guys, do you kind of see relationships or friendships within that band start to like affect the jams like positively, or like, is it you can kind of hear each other better the more you bond and hang out, or how does that all work?
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, the example that I would give is, as the Biscuits in 1999, we like absolutely hated each other in the end of the year from like September through December. And it's some of the best music we've ever made. So I think that in that situation, what was going on was we weren't talking. They were talking, but nobody would talk to me. I got fired at the end of that year and nobody would talk to me. And so my only way of communicating with them was on stage. And then when we would get onto stage, the communication would be angry sometimes, right? Like we would be communicating to each other in an angry way. And like there would be like friction in the music, but that would come out as like, you know, dissonance or it's tension. And then ultimately we would release that tension, as we usually do towards the end of the jams. And the more tense the jams are, the more blissful the release is. And that worked out really, really well for us, except for me when I got fired at the end of the year, you know, but like musically, that was really good. Now, a lot of people who were there in 1999 and 2001 and 2002 have told me over the last 3 weeks that from Austin, Texas shows through Bisco Land, it's the best Biscuits that they've heard in 20 something years, right? So it's 2023. So people are saying the best jams that they've heard since 2002, 2001 are occurring right now, and the cleanest shows and the best vocals and all of that. And I think that to the contrary, that's a result of us actually communicating and being able to talk about things. An example is the confrontation coming out of Dribble the other night in Bisco Land. There's been so many things that I wasn't really vibing on the way that confrontation was going from like 2009 all the way up until like a couple of months ago. It never hit the peak that I wanted it to hit. And I didn't really feel like I could communicate with the band in a way that was going to be received well. So I just ignored it and settled for something that was less than what I wanted it to be. But over the last 12 months, the band has figured out how to communicate with each other in a really mature way, and a way that we never have been able to do before. A lot of that is Joey is there as an intermediary to be able to help us say what we want to say without it being taken the wrong way or without it causing conflict, right? And I had a really long conversation with Alan and Aaron about some things that we used to do way back in the day that we don't do anymore, and how I felt that those things not happening at the end of the jam were preventing us from really peaking the jam. And like their initial response was like, oh, you don't need to do that in order for it to be huge, you know? And it was like, okay, but can we try to do it, like, and see what happens? Like, let's try to see if we can make this thing get where I need it to go, right? And they did. We started messing around with it, and they responded really, really well on stage. You could hear that these little changes, you know, one of them was moving from the electric drums to the organic drums, and then moving from the hi-hat over to the ride cymbal. And at first, when I asked Alan to do that, his response was, we're not Fish. And I was like, well, that's obvious, you know what I mean? But like, maybe we could be more like Fish without it being a negative thing. Like, can we emulate how they get into this peak? If you're calling using the ride cymbal and the peak of the jam like Fish, I hear it in every band and every music, like all through different styles. But, you know, Alan's answer was, and with all due respect to Alan, like, the guy's unbelievable. He was like, we're an electronic band, not a jam band. And I was like, oh my God, what do you mean? Like, we're a jam band. Like, we're one of the quintessential earliest jam bands in the scene. And he was just thinking about it differently than me. He was like, we need to stay electronic. And if I go to the ride cymbal, it's going to make it too much like Fish or too jam bandy. And I was thinking the whole time, like, I want this to be more jam bandy. I want it to peak like a jam band does, like we used to jam in the early days when I brought confrontation. And that's how I mean for the song to be as a composer. And he kind of was like, huh. And so I was like, wow, we're thinking about this differently. And so you're doing what you want to do based off of how you're thinking about it. And it's not how I'm thinking about it. And it's not getting to where I want to get it because you're not thinking about it. And, you know, same with Aaron. I asked him, like, hey, could you throw some like long chords down, some organs down? When Alan goes to that ride cymbal, throw like the organ chord down. He was doing it in the when we would hit the vocals, he would do it, but I was like looking for it like 64 bars earlier for us to switch over from where we were into this peak, you know, into like the peak stuff, like jam bandy peak stuff. And, you know, the conversation was a necessary act. Right. Mm-hmm. Like, that's all of a sudden confrontation started hitting these peaks that we hadn't hit in a really, really long time. And I think the guys in the band recognized instantaneously, like, yeah, we can do that. Yes, it is more like Fish than what we were doing, but also, yes, it does reach a bigger peak and the crowd is taking it in on a different level. And it's okay to be influenced by Fish, and it's okay to use your ride cymbal, and it's okay to play the organ, and it's okay to do these things. We don't have to be shackled by a concept of what we are or what we aren't. We're a jam band. Like, it's crazy to think that we're not a jam band. I was like so shocked to hear that he didn't think that. And then we got on the same page. And once we got on the same page about it, it was like there was one last final step, which was, hey, let's turn the click off and just let the energy go where it goes. And we did that this last weekend. And And the peak of confrontation was just massive. And I looked out into the crowd and the crowd was just going off. And I was turned around and I looked at Alan and I just said, I love you. And he smiled because, that was it. Like we were all on the same page. There wasn't resistance to like what I, as the composer of the song, was hoping was going to happen. They were resisting doing the things, but not because they don't like me or they don't want me to be happy, just because we hadn't talked about it in so long.
Exactly.
And, once we started talking about it like friends, and then, we can express like what we wanted to happen on the other instruments, and they could say, okay, well, let's try it. Like one of our things is we'll try anything. Like if somebody says, hey, let's do that, let's try this, everyone in the band will be like, okay, let's try it. There's no point in not trying it, because if we try it and it's not as good as the other way we were doing it, we just go back to the other way. Right. But we had to get there. It took us a really long time to get to where we were all on the same page about how to approach these things. And, ultimately where we landed is we will try anything. John will make suggestions that sound insane sometimes, but that's because John is a genius. And so there's a fine line between genius and insanity, at least from like the normal person's brain. Like sometimes things that are really genius sound insane. So you have to say, okay, I'm not going to resist this thing that sounds crazy right now. I'm going to suspend my disbelief. His words, John has said, you have to suspend your disbelief at some point and try the thing that the person is asking you to do. And now it's not an issue anymore. Like there was an issue, back in the day, we used to have resistance to new ideas or to things being a way that you're not thinking about it. But, like what we've learned is that John has great ideas, and sometimes it's hard to grasp what they are when he introduces them, but we have to try everything. And 9 times out of 10, or almost 10 times out of 10, when we try one of his suggestions that at first maybe causes a little bit of internal resistance that we don't show anymore, because that causes confrontation. That causes us to not be on the same page. If somebody says, hey, I want to do something, and you're like, I don't love that idea. That's like the new Disco Biscuits. The new Disco Biscuits, we talk, we discuss, we try things out, we support each other, we hear each other out. And from very open communication and incredibly open listening on stage, we are finding ourselves musically more successful than we've ever been.
Alice mushroom chocolates are crafted with the finest quality ingredients and infused with the essence of premium mushrooms to support sleep, desire, and energy. These chocolates offer a decadent fusion of rich cocoa and earthy goodness. Whether you're indulging in a sweet craving or seeking a natural way to unwind, Alice mushroom chocolates are the perfect choice. Order yours today at alicemushrooms.com and elevate your snacking experience. As an added bonus, you can use Creating with Impact 15 for 15% off your order.
So I wanted to make sure that I got in like a couple questions, because I was kind of asking around for like Biscuits fans and kind of was telling them about the podcast. Like, do you guys have any questions? So there's a couple questions that I thought were actually really interesting and really good to ask. So one of them, Joe and also Naya wanted to ask about the inspiration for songs like Therapy and The Tunnel, and kind of some of the more, like, I don't want to say straight up like darker stuff, but kind of darker stuff that you've written. Is it something where you basically just have like a feeling that you need to get out, or like how do you go about kind of writing things that are a little bit more like personal, a little more like sensitive?
Yeah, it's a great question. So like I get chills a little bit when you ask that question, because those are personal songs, right? Like Therapy is personal, and it's, I want to change the lyrics of Therapy because I've changed my sort of philosophy on therapy and medication recently. Like, therapy was kind of like a little bit of like an anti-reaction. It was like how quickly psychiatrists like write prescriptions for people, and like everybody's got ADD, just like give them, like medicate them. What I was saying when I wrote that was like, fuck that. Like, I don't need this medication. You know, I have my friends, I have my people, I could talk to people, but I was wrong. You know, like I do need medication, right? Like I do have things that need to be treated that I've been self-medicating for so long, you know, and now that I'm 50 and I kind of don't want to self-medicate anymore, I have gone into the care of a psychiatrist who's diagnosed me finally with ADHD, right? And like, I knew that I had ADHD. Like it was so obvious, and OCD, like that one's even more obvious to me. Like if things are like a little bit not centered on stage, like if one speaker's over here and one speaker's over here, it drives me fucking crazy. Like I know that I need everything to be like neat, and my desk isn't neat right now and it's driving me a little bit crazy, but like I need like things to be symmetrical on stage. I want like my whole setup to be symmetrical. I need like the front of the pedals have to be exactly 5 feet from my amp. And if they're not exactly 5 feet from my amp, I can feel it instantly. And it drives me crazy, and I'll lose my cool from that. And so the new lyrics of therapy will be 1, 2, 3. I've got ADD, you know, give me all those pills and I'll eat them, I guess, you know, or whatever it is. But like, you know, the tunnel and the bridge and therapy, those are like the ones, you know, last day of everything is one that's almost too hard. Like the lyrics cut too deeply for the other members of the band, and we can't learn it because every time we try to learn it, like, I think maybe now it would be better, but like back in 2009, 2010, when I wrote it about stuff that was happening with the band at that time, like I didn't say what it was about, but it would always kind of explode into us not being able to communicate with each other, and practice would be over. And so I don't even try to bring last days of everything into the band room anymore, because I got to change the lyrics. I started to rewrite the lyrics recently to it in a way that I think will be less abrasive or whatever, less, you know, offensive to whoever. But like, you know, The Grass is Green, like all of the Maui Project songs, I like wrote those songs at a time where I was out of the band. I had been fired by the band, and like all of those songs were kind of written as a response to being fired by the band, right? And Sister Judy Solshak was called No Matter before I turned it into Sister Judy. So that's like the example of a song where I wrote it. It had lyrics that were very direct and clearly about Barber and Magner and Sammy and the band, and how our relationship had been, and how I had treated them and how they had treated me. And I couldn't bring that song into the band because it was about the band, and it was hard to sing. And so I rewrote the lyrics completely to be about a trip to Jamaica that I took with my friends. And it's a lot like lighter content. You know, The Tunnel is about my brother. My brother passed away when I was 6 years old, and that's what it's about. You know, it's about, the chorus is about Robbie. Like, is he there? Is it out there? What else happens? Is there life after death? Is specifically, it was about a situation that my father had, where my father was like a pretty, in the wake of my brother dying, he went into a deep, dark depression, you know, that was defined by alcoholism and drug addiction, and he overdosed. And when he was in the hospital, he died for 8 minutes. And when he was brought back to life, he claimed that he had an out-of-body experience where he was, you know, basically pulled into a tunnel. And in that tunnel, he spoke to my brother, and my brother told him, go home, go back to your body. You need to stop. You need to, like, he was like, it was like so peaceful. And my brother's voice came out and was like, Dad, you need to go back. You know, Mark and Adam are kids. You need to go back and be there for them. And then he kind of pulled himself back and came into his body. I don't know if that's even true, or like if that was, you know, a hallucination that happens from all of the chemicals that hit you when you're dying. I don't know if the tunnel, like everybody who has that same story of out of body and being pulled into a tunnel of light. And I don't know what I believe, but that's what that's about. It's about this time that my father had overdosed, and had a conversation with my brother.
Wow.
So, yeah, that one's tough to play sometimes because it's so, it's emotional. I lost my father not that long after that, 10 years after that. And just singing about my brother and my father can be hard to do, but we try to do it from time to time because it is really meaningful. And it is, I have so many stupid songs like Radiator or Aquatic Ape that aren't about anything. But part of the reason that I wrote those songs like Aquatic Ape and Radiator was because I couldn't talk about my life. It was all so traumatic. Like I was living with PTSD from all of this stuff that had happened, from losing my brother and my parents, divorce, from, all abuse when I was a kid, and then losing my father and losing one of my best friends in high school. It was I had gone through so many traumatic experiences that when I got to where I was 26 and I was writing songs, I couldn't put it into words. It was all too difficult. So I just wrote about the Radiator, and I just wrote about the TV show about the aquatic ape theory that I saw. I just wrote about things in the room because I didn't want to write about real things, right? Mm-hmm. But the tunnel and the bridge and what was the other one? You said therapy. Those songs are about, my family life and sort of the traumas from childhood. And that's, I think, why people connect with them, because they're about real things, right? And they're meaningful to people. I remember the first time I ever met our friend Dan Berkowitz, who's, the former owner of CID. He had lost somebody very close to him recently, and he came up to me and started telling me about it and telling me how much tunnel meant to him. And it was I wasn't even ready to talk about it then. I pushed him away because it was too hard for me to talk about. Even having written about it and had been singing about it, I still wasn't ready to talk about it 20 years ago when this was all happening. I could get on stage and sing about these things, but I couldn't talk about it. And if somebody wanted to talk to me about it, I wanted to get away from them as soon as possible, right? It was just too much trauma.
Exactly.
Now I'm have grown time and distance and had the ability to kind of process some of these things over the years and be further away from them. And it's a little bit easier to talk about. But yeah, it's those songs come from a place of me trying to kind of work through trauma in song, right?
And a lot of that I feel kind of goes to show I feel songwriting has a therapeutic use, for lack of a better word. And then also just music, being a fan of music and finding a song that you can relate to has kind of its own kind of therapy built into it, which is really cool. And I feel that's also kind of how you end up just building this authentic community around what you guys do too.
Right. I think it helps for the music to have meaning.
Mm-hmm.
My whole purpose was just to make catchy music that didn't have meaning, like Jamelia, catchy songs that were stupid and silly and immature. And because I was trying to balance out what John was doing, which was writing really deep and meaningful poetry, but he didn't have choruses in his songs. They were just they were these linear compositions, overtures, this beautiful linear, classical composition, but it doesn't have a chorus in it. And so when he was coming with songs like Hot Air Balloon's got a chorus, but it takes 12 minutes to get to it, right? Or the same with so many of his songs they might have a chorus in them. House Dog Party Favor has a chorus, but it's a linear journey. Then the chorus is 8 or 10 minutes down the line, or at the very, very end of the song. I was writing things specifically to put choruses in that are catchy, that could be right up front, Home Again, or Grass is Green, or Sister Duties. These were meant to be catchy choruses. Jamelia, or catchy choruses that people will just latch on to right away. Grass is Green is another interesting example of one that's sometimes hard to sing because it was a direct response to House Dog Party Favor, where I had kind of assumed that when John is singing City Boys Out of His Mind Again, that I'm the city boy because, he's out from the suburbs and I'm from Manhattan. I always just assumed, although I've never asked him. that when he's City Boys Out of His Mind again, he's talking about me like literally losing my mind, you know, and screaming and fucking being an asshole on tour in 1999 or 1998, you know, because I was like, I did have all these issues that were untreated, you know, or like self-medicating and like using drugs and like doing all of these things and having all of this, you know, not only undiagnosed disorders like, you know, ADHD and OCD, but like also PTSD that was untreated, right? And especially PTSD. And I just couldn't like control my emotions. And so I feel like that's what that was about. And then I kind of responded to it by writing Grass is Green. You know, you never asked me what was wrong. And then you said it in a song. And like, you know, at one point the lyric was, I guess the only question left is who's the city boy, but I dropped that one out because it's just too poignant. Like, you know, it's like too much. And I'm getting chills again thinking about it because it's just like, it was too hard to sing that with him right there on the stage, right? And so I just dropped it out. And now I kind of, when we play Grass is Green, sometimes I'll think about what it's about, but sometimes I'm just kind of singing the lyrics and trying not to think about the conflict that it was born out of, right? Because there isn't a conflict anymore, you know, between us. You know, now it's just kind of, we're friends, right? And we're partners and friends who are all working together towards the same goal. And we are able to regulate our emotions like 50-year-olds, not like 20-year-olds that are like, have no idea where the emotions are even coming from, right? So yeah, that's a good question from Joe. And who is the other person who asked?
Let me double check. Naya. Yeah. So I don't want to keep you too much longer, but so I do have one more question, and it's a fan question. And I figured it was very appropriate. So Kara said, in your opinion, how has music had a positive effect on your mental health?
Well, I want to say like, I'm not sure the answer to that question, right? Because my mental health is a work in progress, right? And so I think sometimes it's had a very positive effect on it, and sometimes it's had kind of a negative effect on it. But like, I don't know that it's the music that's had a negative effect. Obviously, it's not the music as much as the lifestyle around music. Like whether you're playing it or whether you're going to see it, there's so much lifestyle stuff that has a negative effect on your mental health that you really have to know that, right? Like you have to know consciously like that if you're going to get through this and keep your mental health together, then you're going to have to make the right lifestyle choices. You're going to have to stay away from partying. You're going to have to stay away from hard drugs. You have to get enough sleep. I think sleep is the hardest one. Like lack of sleep by itself will destroy my voice and will destroy my ability to regulate my emotions and just my mental health in general. Like keeping so that I don't slip into like some sort of a depression. The other thing is it's hard because like I get like anxiety around the shows. Like I have like stage fright and I have like general anxiety like pre-show. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that music has helped my mental health, you know, but again, it's not because of the music. It's like the ancillary stuff around the music that is, you have to be really, really, really careful. And it's like, if you look at the bands before us, their mental health all was suffering too. Again, all from the lifestyle stuff, not from the music. But from the last question, there's a certain amount of trauma processing that you could do through creation of, you know, lyrics and creation of songs. And like as a song is created and you get closer and closer to it being done, it's one of the great feelings in the world. Like the feeling of creating something and having it start to come together is probably one of the things that gives you the greatest sense of purpose and direction in life. For me, creating is the whole thing, right? Like, you know, whatever you're creating, whether it's a meal in the kitchen or a child or a poem or a book or whatever it is that you create, taking nothing and turning it into something is one of the great feelings in the whole entire world, right? And that's what continues to drive us, is the feeling that you get from creating something beautiful out of thin air. That's what it's all about. But mental health wise, it's a slippery slope. It's a really, really slippery slope there out on the road. And whether you're a fan or a performer, doing the things that you need to do to keep your mental health strong, it's like that's the whole game. For me, it's exercise, right? Eating right, meditation, and sleep, right? And then, of course, staying away from substance abuse, right? And those 5 things are the magic bullet, for good mental health, right? And then if, depending on, like, for me, there's like, recently have come to the understanding that I can do all 5 of those things and I still have a chemical imbalance, right? And once you accept that, even with 8 hours of sleep a night, exercising for an hour a day, eating properly, and meditating, even with all of those elements in place, I still have a chemical imbalance, right? And some things you just can't cure holistically. That was a big admission for me. It's only in the last couple months that I've admitted to myself that this is something that needs to be dealt with, and the way that I've came to it was I quit smoking pot. Mm-hmm. And about 2 weeks into quitting smoking pot, which is only, a couple weeks ago, I was like, okay, there's things that I need to address that I'm not addressing, right? Like, here's all of the ways that I self-medicate. And I went to a doctor and was like, here's all the ways I self-medicate. And we talked for a while. And he was like, well, it makes sense that you're self-medicating for PTSD and, ADHD and depression. And like, you need more serotonin, you need more dopamine, you need more norepinephrine. Like, these are things that you have a deficiency of. And you're going to get them by yourself, but you're just like overdoing it and it doesn't work. That's why self-medication doesn't really work for people, and it ends up throwing your mental health off. So, like I said, it's a work in progress for me. I'm just like kind of learning. I just got my DNA swath back yesterday where I'm able to see how my body metabolizes all different kinds of medications. And we're in the process of working through that. But, over the first couple of weeks or months of being medicated, I've like such a major difference around things that would normally cause anxiety for me. And I'm just kind of letting them roll off, my back, whether it's something at home with my kids, like losing their mind at dinner, or like, being on stage and having something go completely wrong with my equipment, and just like on to the next thing. And like, I had an issue at Bisco Land where my keyboard wasn't working and the pedal wasn't working. And normally I would like lose it and it would kill the whole set. But I was just like, on to the next thing, give me my bass back. And that happened in the dribble confrontation. And you wouldn't even notice that there was an issue. Like, you can hear that I went to the keyboard, played it for like a second. It kind of went crazy. And then I just went back onto the bass. But mentally, I was able to regulate my emotions around it, because I have a more balanced chemical makeup due to the fact that I had finally admitted that I needed to do something about a chemical imbalance. But yeah, I mean, music is great. Like, music is therapeutic. It's helpful to, it's emotional. But like, if you're chemically imbalanced, like, no amount of all of those different therapeutic things are going to help you get chemically balanced, right? So, and that's an individual thing. It's for people who are chemically balanced and totally normal, probably music is, I would conjecture, is an extremely therapeutic thing for their mental health, right? Unless they end up showing up and doing a bunch of cocaine or acid or, MDMA, and then coming home and feeling like shit for a week. So it's a fine line. It
really is.
With music being good for your mental health or bad for your mental health.
Definitely.
Right things, lifestyle wise, lifestyle is 8% of the game, is like, what your lifestyle is. And back to what we were talking about really early in the interview is like consistency of lifestyle choices is where it really starts to add up, right? When you do something every single day a little bit of exercise every single day, a little bit of meditation. Like meditation's great, but if you do it twice a week, it's not going to have that same effect as if you do it 75 days in a row, where it's going to really change your brain chemistry around.
Exactly. Consistency, I feel like, is key with just everything.
Consistency is the full game. You stay consistent and you can accomplish anything in the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to thank you so much for being a guest. For anyone who doesn't know, what all do you have like coming up for the rest of the year?
We just played the Capitol Theater, right? And we just played in Burlington and Hartford and Portland. And the rest of the year is just Miami around the North Beach Festival at the beginning of December, 2 nights. And then New Year's run, which is 1 night in New York, a day off, and then 2 nights to end the year in Philadelphia at the old Electric Factory, now called the Franklin Music Hall. And then, just a couple weeks off. And then we're back out west. We're at the Crystal Ballroom, the Crystal Bay Casino in Tahoe, which I just got word is crushing. From our manager called and was like, Crystal Bay is crushing. And back to the Fillmore. And that's exciting because, we haven't done the West Coast in 15 years, and we just finished our first West Coast run in 15 years, and we're now already booked and ready to go out for our second West Coast run. So I think that, for the fans that are out there and for the fans that are everywhere and for us as a band, it's symbolic of a commitment to the Disco Biscuits that hadn't really been there for the 10 years previous. So it's really exciting to see those tour dates on paper and know that all of the members of the band are just like fully in right now.
Yes. That's so good to hear. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I cannot wait to see you again.
Not too long.
Yes. That's what I like to hear.
When, but it should be announced and not that long. They're going to, I was just walking through our next Texas, we just were in Texas 2 weeks ago, and I'm looking at the spreadsheet and I'm like, oh, wow, Texas again?
Yes.
Back in Texas soon, and we'll be back everywhere. That's the cheer is if we haven't been where you are in a really long time and we just came there, you don't have to worry about waiting another 10 years because we're a touring band.
Awesome. Can't wait.
Great Texas.
Yeah. I saw the trucker hat at the beginning. I was like, hey.
Hey, well, thanks, Jen.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. We'll have to do this again sometime, or
yeah, no doubt.
It up or something.
Great to talk.
See ya.
As always, you can find me at creatingwithimpact.com or on Instagram at creatingwithimpactpod. You can also check out Creating with Impact on Patreon at patreon.com/creatingwithimpact, where you can become a subscriber and get all sorts of extra content and resources. 10% of all of our Patreon proceeds benefit Mental Health America, which advances the mental health and well-being of all people living in the U.S. through public education, research, advocacy, and public policy, and direct service. Leave a 5-star review wherever you listen to this podcast or join our Patreon, and we'll give you a personal shout out on the show. As always, if you have any stories or successes you'd like to share, or if you'd just like to get in on the conversation, you can email creatingwithimpactpod@gmail.com.